My title is Paranormal or Perinormal. I want to coin the word perinormal. Often when I coin words, somebody points out that they've Googled it and somebody's already done it. So I hope that's not true in this case. Before I get on to that, I just want to share with you a couple of points that have come up in the last few days. Las Vegas is a wonderful place in all sorts of respects. Randy pointed out to me at breakfast the first day that everything I saw around me was built by losers. And last night I met at dinner a man who was called the Electric Monk. That was the name on his label. The Electric Monk, of course, is a character from Douglas Adams's Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency. It's a device that you buy to do your believing for you. The sales literature states that this device is capable of believing things they wouldn't believe in Salt Lake City. Well, the Electric Monk whom I met last night didn't look quite like this, but he made the interesting point that Las Vegas, from a biological point of view, is a filter feeder. It has these streams of people coming from all over the country, and they come and they stay in hotels like this, and they go away a couple of days later having shed all their money, and they go back home again, and then another stream comes in. And I thought it was a fascinating way in which biology can illuminate the way we think. The other thing that occurred to me in the last couple of days, I got an email from my friend Matt Ridley, whom some of you may know, and he was taking off from the fact that in Britain lately there's been a controversy involving the Archbishop of Canterbury as to whether the tsunami should make people lose their faith in God, and that the Archbishop was misrepresented as saying that he had lost his faith in God. Of course, he hadn't. He merely said that he could understand it if people had their faith shaken. Matt Ridley's point, which I really like, is that tsunami was not an act of God, but 9/11 was. And I think that's a meme that deserves to be spread around. Now, I want to come to the question of whether religion is paranormal. Some years ago, I was honored by one of America's leading skeptical organizations dedicated to investigating paranormal claims: astrology, dowsing, telepathy, psychokinesis, flying saucers, and all that sort of thing. In my acceptance speech of this honor, I asked why religion didn't seem to be included in the list of things to be debunked by the skeptics. And I suggested that it should be. I was roundly ticked off by the distinguished elder statesman of the society, who, by the way, is not here. It was not that he was religious himself, far from it. He did not want to give offense. But why is it any worse to offend religious people than to offend telepathists, astrologers, or spoonbenders? Another example of the same thing, some of you may have come across the Darwin Awards, which are these things given annually to honor people who improve the human genome by accidentally killing themselves in really stupid ways. And of necessity, the honor is awarded posthumously. Well, these things are often very funny, but you have to admit there's something a bit sick about it, a bit perhaps slightly lacking in taste. They do, after all, involve people getting killed, and you might think that the people who run the site would therefore be somewhat insensitive types, not over-inhibited. But my secretary came across a newspaper item which she thought was worthy of consideration for a Darwin Award, and she submitted it. And the story I'm telling you is about the reason why it was rejected. The story she submitted was about a preacher in the Deep South who decided to handle a rattlesnake in order to demonstrate his faith in the power of God. And the rattlesnake bit him and he died. And so my secretary sent this in as she thought a worthy winner of the Darwin Award. It was rejected, not because it wasn't funny enough, which is perhaps arguable, but because they wouldn't even consider anything which involved mocking religion. You can mock anything else, but you cannot mock religion. Our friend Douglas Adams, I expect some of you knew him, said a wonderful thing which was recorded, fortunately, at a Cambridge conference that I was privileged to be at. I'm going to read this out. It takes a while, but I think it's interesting enough to be worth it. He said, those of you who know him will have to imagine his voice, which shines through everything that he wrote. Now, the invention of the scientific method and science is, I'm sure we'll all agree, the most powerful intellectual idea, the most powerful framework for thinking and investigating and understanding and challenging the world around us that there is, and that it rests on the premise that any idea is there to be attacked. And if it withstands the attack, then it lives to fight another day. And if it doesn't withstand the attack, then down it goes. Religion doesn't seem to work like that. It has certain ideas at the heart of it which we call sacred or holy or whatever. That's an idea we're so familiar with, whether we subscribe to it or not, that it's kind of odd to think of what it really means. Because really what it means is, here is an idea or a notion that you're not allowed to say anything bad about. You're just not. Why not? Because you're not. If somebody votes for a party that you don't agree with, you're free to argue about it as much as you like. Everybody will have an argument, but nobody feels aggrieved by it. If somebody thinks taxes should go up or go down, you're free to have an argument about that. But on the other hand, if somebody says, I mustn't move a light switch on a Saturday, you say, oh, fine, I respect that. The odd thing is, even as I'm saying that, I'm thinking, is there an Orthodox Jew in the audience who's going to be offended by the fact that I just said that? But I wouldn't have thought, maybe there's somebody from the left wing or somebody from the right wing or somebody who subscribes to this view or the other in economics when I was making the other points. I just think, fine, we have different opinions. But the moment I say something that has something to do with religion, we all become terribly protective and terribly defensive and say, no, no, we don't attack that. Why should it be that it's perfectly legitimate to support the Labour Party or the Conservative Party, Republicans or Democrats, this model of economics versus that, Macintosh instead of Windows, but to have an opinion about how the universe began, about who created the universe, no, that's holy. What does that mean? Why do we ring-fence that? For any other reason other than that we've just got used to doing so. There's no other reason at all. It's just one of those things that crept into being, and once that loop gets going, it's very, very powerful. So we are used to not challenging religious ideas. But it's very interesting how much of a furore Richard creates when he does it. This was a headline in the London Daily Mail, which I've always greatly treasured. To resume Douglas Adams's speech, everybody gets absolutely frantic about that because you're not allowed to say these things. Yet when you look at it rationally, there is no reason why those ideas shouldn't be as open to debate as any other, except that we've agreed somehow between us that they shouldn't be. Well, I am going to obviously challenge that, and one of my ways of doing it is to introduce this new distinction between the paranormal and the perinormal. The Greek preposition para means beyond. So paranormal means beyond normal, and I take that to mean violating the laws of physics. Paranormal means truly miraculous. My archetypal example of the paranormal would be a perpetual motion machine, which is completely impossible, not just to present-day science, but for all time. Paranormal is things that we can never understand, which has no explanation, lies beyond the reach of science. We were not meant to understand. We prefer not to understand. We positively enjoy not understanding. So when somebody describes something as paranormal, they mean that it's beyond explanation. And I want to distinguish this from perinormal, which means something that's not explained yet, but we're still working on it. Peri is another Greek preposition, which means something like around or encircling, in the vicinity of, in the neighborhood of. So I want to use perinormal for phenomena which may be beyond existing science, in the sense that existing science doesn't yet understand them. But they're in the area immediately surrounding the normal, as it's at present understood. They're waiting to be absorbed into the normal as science progresses and the normal expands its territory, encroaching on the periphery of the present-day normal, encroaching on the perinormal and eating it up. Perinormal is something we don't yet understand, but we're working on it. Or we understand kind of, but it still feels to us rather mysterious, amazing, awe-inspiring. The easiest way to find an example of a perinormal phenomenon is to take a piece of modern technology and go back in history and imagine how it would be perceived by an inhabitant of a past century. A mobile phone would have seemed like a pure miracle to anybody more than a couple of centuries ago. If you ask for a present-day example of a perinormal, you ask me to look into the future and say, what are the things that, what are the mobile phones of tomorrow, so to speak? It's hard to do. I mean, one guess might be quantum computing. Another might be truly intelligent, emotional, conscious electronic computers. My literary agent, the aggressive John Brockman, who's widely believed to carry a gun, is much more than a literary agent. He hosts a website, which I put up there because it's really interesting. And once a year, around about January the 1st, he invites his star-studded address book of mostly scientists and other intellectuals to answer a particular question. And this year, it's things like, what's the greatest invention of all time? This year, the question was, what do you believe is true, even though you cannot prove it? I'm not going to go through the various answers. More than 100 people responded to this, and they interpreted it in different ways. Some of them interpreted it to mean something which they just don't yet find a way to prove. But other people took it to mean something that you can't in principle prove, but they still believe it. It's an interesting site, and I recommend it. I'm now going to go through a set of debatable cases just to sort of illustrate what I mean by the distinction between paranormal and perinormal. You see the list of them there, and I'm going to go through them one by one. First, future technologies. Arthur C. Clarke proposed, many of you will know this, Clarke's third law. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And magic here means truly supernatural, not magic in the what I take as the American sense of conjuring tricks. So by magic, Clarke is British after all, he means truly supernatural. So any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable to the people who encounter it as though it were truly supernatural, truly paranormal. We have to be a little bit cautious. We have to be careful about not being overconfident because of the example, my favorite example is William Thomson, Lord Kelvin, one of the most distinguished physicists of the 19th century, who said heavier-than-air flying machines are impossible and X-rays will prove to be a hoax. Lord Kelvin also gave Darwin a great deal of grief because he proved, using the best physics available at the time, that the universe, the world, is far too young to have allowed evolution to take place. This did give Darwin a lot of grief because physics was regarded as a kind of senior science. Physics pulled rank on biology. What Darwin should have said, but didn't, is, well, if your physics tells you that the world is too young for evolution, then your physics must be wrong, because my biology tells me that there has to have been time. All I'm saying is there's no obvious reason why one science should pull rank on another. My next discussable case, extraterrestrial superintelligence. One of the favorite subjects for professional skeptics is flying saucers, and rightly so. When investigated, they always turn out to be illusions or hoaxes. But there's nothing paranormal in the idea of our being visited by extraterrestrial civilizations. If it ever happened and was authenticated, it would immediately be embraced within the pale of the normal, having previously been actually perinormal. A physical visitation from extraterrestrial civilizations is many, many orders of magnitude less probable than a visitation by radio. SETI, in my opinion, is a respectable scientific enterprise worthy of our support. Radio waves travel at the maximum velocity allowed in an Einsteinian universe, and they can broadcast outwards in all directions, where physical craft can only go in one direction and at a much lower maximum velocity. What would be really surprising would be a physical visitation of the flying saucer kind before a radio visitation, because any civilization advanced enough to achieve space travel would have to be advanced enough to have already solved the problem, the much easier problem of radio. But there is there's a low but finite probability that we shall be visited by an extraterrestrial civilization by radio, and a much, much lower probability that we shall meet them face to face. There could be theological implications of a visitation from outer space, whether physically or by radio, and I'm talking about radio here. We might well regard them as gods. If we ever did encounter an extraterrestrial civilization, presumably by radio, it's highly likely that they would be very, very much more advanced than we would. My reasoning is illustrated in this slide. I won't take too long on it. The blue circle, which includes the red circle, is the radius of the sphere within which there could be worlds who have heard from us. Because we've only had radio for about a century, so the sphere who could have heard from us has a radius of 1 light century. The red circle, the red sphere in the middle, is the radius of the sphere from which we could have received a reply, which is half the radius. The green area is the volume from which we could have received an unsolicited messages, and it's trillions of cubic light years compared to the mere millions of cubic light years, which is the sphere of people who could have heard from us. So that green volume, that huge green volume, contains civilizations which are not just, haven't just had radio for 100 years, they could have had radio for billions of years. And so that's just one way of arguing. There are all sorts of other ways of arguing that if we ever did encounter information that there was a civilization outside our planet, it would be hugely more advanced than us. And we would think they were gods, because their science would be far, far more advanced than ours. Clarke's third law would come into play. But of course, they wouldn't be paranormal gods. They'd only seem like gods. They'd be perinormal gods. Perinormal gods are just civilizations which have evolved by the normal Darwinian process, I conjecture. That, by the way, was my conjecture to the Brockman symposium this year, that not only is life on this planet governed by Darwinian principles, but life all over the universe is governed by the same Darwinian principles. That was what I entered as my offering to the question, what do you believe, although you cannot prove it? Paranormal gods, by contrast, would not be the end product of a process of Darwinian evolution, something that came about by gradual degrees from simple beginnings, although they may have had much longer in which to do it than we have. Paranormal gods would be things that existed before the universe, that created the universe, and that is something quite different. So the mere existence of a superintelligence would be perinormal, not paranormal. My next discussable case is how I managed to leave out conjuring tricks. I meant to put in conjuring tricks there, and there indeed we have some friends. Well, you might wonder what conjurers are doing in this list at all. Of course, nothing that they do is paranormal. It isn't even perinormal, because it doesn't step outside the bounds of existing science, let alone future science. But still, they belong in this list for three reasons. First, some conjurers fraudulently pretend to be something other than conjurers. I did have a picture of a particular individual on that slide, but just before coming in, I discussed the matter with the JREF's legal representative, legal counsel, and he gave me some pro bono advice, as a result of which the photograph that I had that had adorned this slide, the portrait that had adorned this slide, I removed. Such frauds, fakes, charlatans make a much better living than they would if they were honest conjurers performing and making no more claims than that they are conjurers. The second reason why conjuring belongs in this list is that conjurers really do shake our confidence and give us a salutary lesson on how difficult it is to judge whether something actually is within the bounds of physics. Of course, we know that it is within the bounds of existing physics, but it's sorely tempting sometimes when you see a really great performance, as we've seen at this conference, to think that anybody a bit less sophisticated than this audience might be tempted to think that this was at very least perinormal, beyond existing science, and if not paranormal. As I said, it isn't even perinormal, but it looks like it. And this is one of the reasons why scientists are not the best qualified to unmask fraudulent paranormalists. Professional illusionists, such as we have at this conference, have a very valuable role to play in science, in the difficult task of distinguishing the perinormal or even the paranormal from fraud or hoax. They have a very valuable role to play also in fake science, which does sometimes get into the journals. My next discussable case is astrology, telepathy, the whole range of things which tend to be worked on by skeptical investigators. And I'm using these to remind me, to make the point, that we're strictly not in a position to know whether certain things are paranormal or perinormal. There are two stages in an investigation, as it seems to me. The first stage is to demonstrate statistically that the phenomenon in question exists. And this is an important stage which is often left out. It's totally left out in all anecdotal accounts of things like telepathy, the ones that, well, Michael Sherman mentioned dreams where your uncle dies and then you wake up and you find that he has died, that kind of thing. Before there's been a proper statistically verified, statistically analyzed demonstration, some kind of perhaps double-blind experiment in some cases, before you've done that stage one, there is no reason to move on to stage two and to start wondering what might be a possible underlying mechanism for the phenomenon in question. If an alleged phenomenon passes the test of stage 1, there's a prima facie case for the possibility that we have here a strange and unusual phenomenon, perhaps paranormal, perhaps perinormal. If a telepathic experiment of the J.B. Rhine type managed to pass the stage 1 test, that is a proper experimental demonstration, properly conducted with double-blind controls, statistically analyzed with a genuinely low probability of being due to chance, with Randy and dozens of other hawk-eyed skeptics and conjurers looking in, investigating every detail, what should we conclude? Well, in my view, what we should do is immediately turn the big battalions of scientific effort to the task of seeking a mechanism. That's stage 2. If a mechanism is found, for example, a new kind of field, a new kind of wave propagation, hitherto unknown to physics, then, well, for a start, the person who discovers it will probably get the Nobel Prize for Physics. And at that point, we know that the phenomenon was perinormal and has now been embraced within the normal. If the best efforts of physicists consistently fail to find a mechanism to explain the phenomenon demonstrated in stage 1, should we conclude that the phenomenon is paranormal rather than perinormal? Should we conclude that it is genuinely beyond the reach of science? Well, I throw that question open for discussion, but my private answer is no. I would turn back to the physicists and tell them to try harder. I think it's analogous to those creationists and so-called intelligent design theorists. Intelligent design, you know, has been described as creationism in a cheap tuxedo. People like that who reason that some phenomenon in biology must be created, not evolved, because they cannot think of a gradual series of intermediates leading up to it. And once again, I think that's a failure on our part rather than a genuine demonstration of the need for design. Similarly, if the J.B. Rhine type experiment indicates that we have something going on and physicists fail to find a mechanism, then it seems to me to be the wrong way to do science, to say, oh, well, then it must be supernatural, it must be paranormal. But I can see that some advocates of the paranormal might think this rather unfair. My position, as they would see it, amounts to a refusal in principle to recognize anything as paranormal. Anything that looks paranormal is just dismissed by the chiding try harder. So that is a point that paranormal advocates might bring out. Homeopathy I've singled out as a special case because I think it's more deserving of our skepticism than any other branch of so-called alternative medicine. Other types of alternative medicine, like acupuncture and faith healing, are testable and may very well be valid. They can at least submit themselves to stage 1 of my 2-stage test, which would be a double-blind control trial. Homeopathy has real problems with double-blind control trials, essentially because the experimental dose is identical to the control dose. There is a kind of slithering through, there is a kind of way out of that, which they occasionally resort to, which is that even though you've done your successive successive dilution so that, as Randy has put it, the concentration of the active ingredient is equivalent to 1 molecule in a volume of water the size of the solar system. So obviously there can be nothing chemical going on. In that sense, it's true that the experimental dose is identical to the control dose. But what the loophole is, well, it's not chemistry, it's physics. Something about the original ingredient, something about the trace of the original ingredient, which has become a trace through successive dilution, has imprinted itself upon the water. So although there aren't any molecules left, the water retains some kind of memory of the original molecule. Now, you're not intended to laugh at this, because this is a good example of what I'm talking about, conceivable perinormal. I mean, suppose that somebody did a really, really good test of, a stage 1 test of homeopathy. Now, because it's stage 1, remember, we're not concerning ourselves at this stage with whether we understand how it can come about. We know that it can't come about by chemistry because there aren't any molecules of the active ingredient left in the grotesquely over-diluted control. So it can't be chemistry. But we're leaving open the question of how it works. We're doing our stage 1 test with an open mind. So we do something like get, I don't know, 1,000 patients who are ill with something or other, and we divide them in half, and we randomly divide them in half in a double-blind way, so nobody knows which individuals are going to receive the homeopathic dose, which individuals are going to receive the control dose. The doctors who examine the patients before treatment don't know which are controls and which are experimentals. The homeopathic treatment which is prescribed for each patient is up to the best homeopath you can find, and every patient has his own or her own prescription by a very good, reputable homeopath. And this is done regardless of whether the patient is in the experimental treatment or the control group. They all have a prescription written out, the ideal prescription for them by a homeopath. And then they are all given the identical homeopathic treatment, with a single exception that in the controls there is no active ingredient. It's important even that the control substance, which starts off as pure water, should go through the same series of 32 or whatever it is successive dilutions. There's nothing to dilute, but nevertheless do it, because that's the only way you could say that the experimental and the control dose is the same. The homeopaths who do the shaking up together of the dilution and the dilution and the dilution, they don't know whether they're diluting a control or an experimental, but they still go through the motions of successive dilution. The patients are all given their successively diluted dose. On the one hand, nothing has been diluted. On the other hand, a putative active ingredient has been diluted. And you then, again, blind, do the analysis. Only when finally everything has been done do you reveal, when the doctors have looked again at the patients and judged whether they've improved or not, when the homeopaths indeed have looked at the patients and decided whether each one has improved or not, only then do you break the code to decide which ones were treatment and which ones were controls. Now, if that were all done properly, and if you got a p-value, it would have to be a very, very low p-value. That's the probability of getting a false result by chance. If you found if stage 1 had been passed, and there really, really, really is an effect, do the experiment again, do the experiment again, there really, really is an effect, then you turn to stage 2. And then you would actually have to take seriously something like the possibility that the water has a memory. We don't laugh at it because that's the whole point about the perinormal, is that we don't yet have the physics by definition that qualifies us to laugh at it. However, if homeopaths did that experiment, if they really, really passed stage 1, then the entire world should sit up and take notice, because anybody who managed to demonstrate that and then go on to stage 2 and find out what the mechanism was, if it really was a new physical field, a new force in physics that nobody had discovered before, then they would get the Nobel Prize not only for medicine, but for physics as well. And you might think that with such a prize dangling before them, they would be hard at work trying to pass stage 1, but they're not. And one can't help feeling that they, in their heart of hearts, know that they would not pass stage 1. But the prizes should be really great. I mean, it shouldn't be that difficult to set up the sort of double-blind experiment that I've proposed and really, really convince the scientific world. I think it's wrong to say that the scientific world would just dismiss it. I mean, I think that if the double-blind trials were really properly done, that we would take it seriously, and then there would be enormous pressure on physicists to discover the reason. Needless to say, my belief, my shirt, is on the prediction that it would not pass stage 1. Laying on of hands, faith healing. Psychosomatic and placebo effects are well documented and surprisingly powerful. So faith healing is, at least in some cases, entirely plausible. It's, again, not like conjuring tricks. It's not paranormal, and it's not even perinormal, because it's already understood. Perpetual motion machines. This was my example, you remember, of a genuinely paranormal effect, if it were ever realized, which it won't be. Sir Arthur Eddington, famous physicist of the first part of the 20th century, said of the laws of thermodynamics, of course, a perpetual motion machine would be a violation of the laws of thermodynamics. This is a nice quote from Arthur Eddington. He said, "If somebody points out to you that your pet theory of the universe is in disagreement with Maxwell's equations, then so much the worse for Maxwell's equations. If it is found to be contradicted by observation, well, these experimentalists do bungle things sometimes. But if your theory is found to be against the second law of thermodynamics, I can give you no hope. There is nothing for it but to collapse in deepest humiliation." A perpetual motion machine is one thing that definitely belongs in the paranormal, miraculous category. It is not perinormal, and it will never come to pass. Now, I wanted to, this was all in a way a preamble to the second part of my talk, which is, where does religion fit in? Having introduced and exemplified the distinction between the paranormal and the perinormal, let's turn to religion and ask, where does that fit in? Is religion paranormal? Is it perinormal? What is it? Well, in some senses it's paranormal, in other senses perinormal, and it's an important distinction not to be underestimated, which I now want to explain. Paranormal religion would be actually just about anything that ordinary people mean by religion at all. Miracles, such as turning water into wine. Creationism, which is the mother of all miracles. Praying for God to intervene in everyday life. Praying for God to cure us of cancer, or to send rain when we're in a drought, or to... what's that story? I think Michael Shermer had a story in one of his books of General Patton in the last war, who turned to the chaplain of his army when he was waiting for a big battle, and there was a lot of rain and there was a lot of mud, and he said, "Chaplain, I want you to issue a prayer for all the troops to pray for rain. I don't see why my troops should fight the weather as well as Germans, let's see whether we can get God on our side. And the chaplain very properly said, sir, that's not part of my profession to try to get God to intervene and help us to kill people. And Patton said, are you the chaplain or are you not? Give me a prayer now. And so he did, and it was distributed to the entire army. And indeed, the rain stopped. Life after death, everything that most people speak of and think of as religion. The question came up after in Penn and Teller yesterday, and a woman somewhere over there, obviously very sincere, asked why they were so dismissive as skeptics of religion, because she was a Unitarian, and Unitarians believe in reason and believe in evidence and do not believe in the supernatural. And Penn very properly said, well, in what sense then are you religious at all? And clearly what we had there was a disagreement about the right way to use the word religion. And that's now what I want to turn to. I want to make a distinction between paranormal religion, which is what Penn and I suspect most people mean by religion, and perinormal religion, which I also call Einsteinian religion, which is non-supernatural, and the only question is whether it's right to use the word religion at all. So, Einsteinian religion. I've previously written about one of my teachers, of whom I was fond, who was an Anglican priest. And he told us of the never-forgotten instant that triggered his calling. As a boy, he was lying in a field with his face buried in the grass. And he suddenly found himself engulfed in a magnified awareness of the tangled stems and roots, a whole new world, the world of ants and beetles, even soil bacteria, microorganisms, by the billions. And at that moment, the micro-world of the soil seemed to swell and become one with the universe and one with the soul of the boy contemplating them. He interpreted the experience in religious terms, and it eventually led him to the priesthood. But much the same mystical feeling is common among scientists. In his boyhood, at least, my clergyman friend was probably not aware of the closing lines of The Origin of Species, the famous entangled bank passage. By the way, I don't often find cause for patriotic pride, but the Darwin £10 note, as distinct from what's written on your notes, here are the closing words of The Origin of Species. Thus, from the war of nature, from famine and death, the most exalted object which we are capable of conceiving, namely the production of the higher animals, directly follows. There is grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers having been originally breathed into few forms or into one, and that whilst this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed law of gravity, from so simple a beginning, endless forms most beautiful and most wonderful have been and are being evolved. Carl Sagan, who was a better poet than Darwin, wrote in his inspiring book, Pale Blue Dot, how is it that hardly any major religion has looked at science and concluded, this is better than we thought? The universe is much bigger than our prophets said, grander, more subtle, more elegant. Instead, they say, no, 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 my God is a little God, and I want him to stay that way. A religion, old or new, that stressed the magnificence of the universe as revealed by modern science, might be able to draw forth reserves of reverence and awe, hardly tapped by the conventional faiths. Sooner or later, such a religion will emerge. Well, I would dissent from only the last sentence of that, but purely because of the point I'm now trying to make, which is that religion is not the proper word to use, although, of course, many of the attributes of religious feeling, such as the feeling of my clergyman lying face down in the grass, are shared by atheistic scientists, such as Sagan and indeed me. I think a great deal of unfortunate misunderstanding is caused by failure to distinguish two kinds of religion, what can be called, what I'm calling, Einsteinian religion from supernatural religion, which are respectively perinormal and paranormal. Einstein frequently invoked the name of God, and he's not the only atheistic scientist to do so. And this raises unfortunate opportunities for misunderstanding by supernaturalists who are only too eager to misunderstand. The last words of Stephen Hawking's Brief History of Time, "For then we should know the mind of God," are notoriously misunderstood. Ursula Goodenough's book, The Sacred Depths of Nature, clearly shows, if you read it, that she's just as staunch an atheist as I am. Yet she goes to church regularly, and numerous passages in her book are almost begging to be taken out of context and used as ammunition for supernaturalist, paranormalist religion. She coins the phrase religious naturalist for herself. She wants to be religious, but in an atheistic way. The present Astronomer Royal, Sir Martin Rees, also goes to church. In his case, he calls himself an unbelieving Anglican. He goes to church, quote, "out of loyalty to the tribe." There are many intellectual atheists who proudly call themselves Jews and observe Jewish rites, mostly again out of loyalty to a much more ancient tribal tradition, but also because of a confusing view, of a confusing willingness to label as religion the pantheistic wonder which many of us share and which Einstein did as well. One of Einstein's most eagerly quoted remarks is, "Science without religion is lame, religion without science is blind." You'll find that quoted over and over again. But Einstein also said a lot of other things, such as, "It was, of course, a lie what you read about my religious convictions, a lie which is being systematically repeated. I do not believe in a personal God. And I have never denied this, but I've expressed it clearly. If something is in me which can be called religious, then it is the unbounded admiration for the structure of the world so far as our science can reveal it." So by religion, Einstein meant something different from what is conventionally meant. Some more quotations. "I am a deeply religious non-believer. This is a somewhat new kind of religion. I have never imputed to nature a purpose or a goal or anything that could be understood as anthropomorphic. What I see in nature is a magnificent structure that we can comprehend only very imperfectly, and that must fill a thinking person with a feeling of humility. This is a genuinely religious feeling that has nothing to do with mysticism. I don't try to imagine a personal God. It suffices to stand in awe at the structure of the world insofar as it allows our inadequate senses to appreciate it. The idea of a personal God is quite alien to me and seems even naive." In 1940, Einstein wrote a famous paper in which that phrase, "I do not believe in a personal God," appeared. He said a lot of other things that were very pro-religion in his sense. Nevertheless, an extraordinary storm of protest was unleashed by this 1940 paper of Einstein. The most extreme was from the founder of the Calvary Tabernacle Association in Oklahoma, who wrote a letter as follows: "Professor Einstein, I believe that every Christian in America will answer you, we will not give up our belief in our God and his Son, Jesus Christ. But we invite you, if you do not believe in the God of the people of this nation, to go back where you came from. I have done everything in my power to be a blessing to Israel, and then you come along and with one statement from your blasphemous tongue, do more to hurt the cause of your people than all the efforts of the Christians who love Israel can do to stamp out anti-Semitism in our land. Professor Einstein, every Christian in America will immediately reply to you, take your crazy fallacious theory of evolution, sick, and go back to Germany where you came from. Or stop trying to break down the faith of a people who gave you a welcome when you were forced to flee your native land. Judge Philip Foreman of Trenton, New Jersey, wrote, if Albert Einstein is right, and there is no personal God, then America is founded on fable and falsehood. If there is no God, then the citizen has no God-given rights. Then all the rights set forth in the Constitution are sham and delusion. If man has no creator, then our fathers fought for a lie. Then the rights of the citizenship are based on a lie. Then Professor Einstein has subscribed to a lie in the very act of pledging allegiance to a form of government which, according to his philosophy, is founded on a lie. I don't need to tell this audience what a lot of historical inaccuracies there are in both those quotations. Einstein was certainly not a theist. He was repeatedly indignant at the suggestion, and he was castigated for that. But was he a deist? A theist, remember, believes in a supernatural intelligence who, in addition to his main work of creating the universe, does some combination of the following: answers prayers, forgives or punishes sins, frets about right and wrong, and knows when we do them or even think them, intervenes in the world by performing miracles. But a deist believes in a supernatural intelligence whose activities are confined to setting up the laws that govern the universe in the first place. The deist God never intervenes thereafter. Pantheists don't believe in a supernatural God at all, but use the word God as a supernatural synonym for nature or for the universe or for the lawfulness that governs the workings of the universe. Deists differ from theists in that their God does not answer prayers, is not interested in sins or confessions, does not read our thoughts, and above all, does not intervene with capricious miracles. Deists differ from pantheists in that the deist God is some kind of cosmic intelligence rather than the pantheist's metaphoric or poetic synonym for the laws of the universe. Pantheism is sexed-up atheism. Deism is watered-down theism. Well, having got those definitions in place, the quotations that I've seen, the books that I've read about Einstein, all indicate to me that he was a pantheist, not a deist. And that's what I'm going to mean by Einsteinian religion. Just one other quotation to summarize that. To sense that behind anything that can be experienced, there is a something that our mind cannot grasp, and whose beauty and sublimity reaches us only indirectly, and as a feeble reflection, this is religiousness. In this sense, I am religious. And in that sense, I too am religious. There's every reason to think that famous Einsteinisms like God is subtle, but he is not malicious, or he does not play dice, or did God have a choice in creating the universe, are pantheistic, not deistic, and certainly not theistic. God does not play dice should be translated as randomness does not lie at the heart of all things. Did God have a choice in creating the universe means could the universe have begun in any other way than the way in which it did begin? Einstein was using God in a purely metaphoric, poetic sense. And so is Stephen Hawking, and so are most of those physicists who occasionally slip into the language of religious metaphor. Physicists do it much more than biologists, by the way. Paul Davies's book, The Mind of God, seems to me to hover somewhere between Einsteinian pantheism and an obscure form of deism for which he was rewarded with the Templeton Prize. The Templeton Prize, as you know, is a very large sum of money which is given each year to a scientist who is prepared to sell his scientific soul and make a Faustian pact with religion. My friend Dan Dennett, the philosopher, once said to me, "Richard, if ever you fall on hard times," and he's right. To some people, the distinction between pantheism and deism is trivial, or at least less important than the distinction between deism and theism. Not to me. This is because, as an evolutionary biologist, I'm fascinated by creative intelligence as something that needs explaining in its own right. Darwinian evolution provides an explanation. It's the only workable explanation that has ever been proposed, an explanation for the existence of intelligence alongside the existence of all other aspects of life. Creative intelligence, like all other aspects of life, comes into the universe late as the product of an exhaustive process of gradual change, the slow evolution of complex organization, of nervous systems, some other kind of computational machinery, which may be secondarily designed by evolved nervous systems. In this respect, deism is almost as bad as theism. For deists, creative intelligence had some sort of prior existence. Creative intelligence is responsible for designing the universe with laws and constants that eventually, through evolution, brought into being our kind of life and our kind of intelligence. That wasteful and unparsimonious view is radically different from the pantheistic use of God as a poetic synonym for the laws of the universe. A universe that begins with creative intelligence has got to be a very different kind of universe from a universe in which creative intelligence grows up, emerges after hundreds of millions of years of evolution guided by natural selection. In the Einsteinian sense, I too am religious, but I prefer not to call myself religious, and I'm agreeing here with Penn yesterday, because I think it is destructively misleading. It's misleading because for the vast majority of people, religion implies supernatural, paranormal. And for the same reason, I would have preferred it if physicists such as Einstein, Hawking, and others had refrained from using the word God in their special physicist's metaphorical sense. The metaphorical God of the physicists is, in any case, light years away from the interventionist, miracle-wreaking, thought-reading, sin-punishing, prayer-answering, busybodyish and bossy God of the theist and of ordinary language. Deliberately to confuse the two is, in my opinion, an act of intellectual high treason. I want to finish with some notes for a possible book on evolution, on religion, which I'm thinking of as which may be my next book. Begin with a spectrum of religious beliefs as they relate to science, especially my own science of evolution. One end of the spectrum are those who believe that the Holy Book is literally true. These are young Earth creationists, approximately 50% of the American population. Pause for a drink at that point. Two, the Holy Book is true, but one day is literally not 24 hours. Those are old Earth creationists. Three, evolution is true, but guided by God. Four, evolution is guided by natural selection, but God gives it a bit of help over the difficult jumps. Five, evolution is true. God didn't give it any help over difficult jumps, but he did start it off and then stood back. And insofar as one can discern a coherent line of thought in Antony Flou's recent pronouncements, this seems to be at least one of the positions, one of the many positions he's adopted in the last couple of weeks. 6, God started the universe off and then stood back, and that is deism. 7, God does not exist as a person at all, but the word may be used as a poetic metaphor. That's Einstein, Hawking, etc. And 8, God does not exist and the word should not be used, even as a metaphor, because it's confusing, and not merely confusing, but people are actively eager to seize it as a possible source of confusion. Some other jottings for my next book on religion. Why are people religious? This is a very big subject, and I haven't time to go into this now. I want to work on this with my colleague Robin Elizabeth Cornwell, who's at this conference. She's a developmental and evolutionary psychologist, and we've got various ideas for work there. A classification of how we know what we know: tradition, revelation, faith, authority, and evidence. Only evidence, in my view, is an admissible source of knowledge. I want to illustrate that briefly. Some of you may have seen this slide before. I'm imagining a hypothetical issue of a biological journal, the Quarterly Review of Biology, which is devoted, as particular numbers of journals sometimes are, to a particular question: did an asteroid kill the dinosaurs? And the first paper in this hypothetical symposium is a fairly standard scientific paper, which says, iridium layer at KT boundary and potassium argon dated crater in Yucatan indicate that an asteroid killed the dinosaurs. That's a standard evidence-based paper. Second paper. The President of the Royal Society has been vouchsafed a strong inner conviction that an asteroid killed the dinosaurs. The third paper. It has been privately revealed to Professor Huxdane that an asteroid killed the dinosaurs. Professor Haldley was brought up to have total and unquestioning faith that an asteroid killed the dinosaurs. Professor Hawkins has promulgated an official dogma binding on all loyal Hawkinsians that an asteroid killed the dinosaurs. Again, during the questions to Penn and Teller yesterday, somebody asked about religion. I think the fact that Penn's wife was about to have a baby and what was his view on the religious upbringing of children. This is one thing I do have very strong views about, and this would certainly figure in any book that I had to write on religion. This picture is a charming picture which was published in The Independent some years ago. At least it was written up as charming. It was supposed to be charming. It was at the time of Christmas, and it was about a nativity play at a school. And the point of the story is that in this nativity play, the three wise men were played by Shadbreet Baines, a Sikh, Musharraf Khalil, a Muslim, and Adele Marlowe, a Christian, all aged 4. How can a 4-year-old child know whether it's a Sikh, a Muslim, or a Christian? Yet our society unthinkingly accepts a story like that, a picture like that, and thinks it's rather charming. Imagine Shadbreet Baines And even more if it had said Shadbreet Baines, an atheist, Musharraf Khalil, an agnostic, and Adele Marlowe, what shall we say, a Mithrasian. You cannot imagine labeling a 4-year-old child an atheist, can you? Atheists, on the whole, don't bring up their children to be atheists. They either don't tell them anything, or they go with the flow and let them be brought up as whatever religion prevails in the culture. You've seen maps of the world in which different areas are shaded to represent either different languages, which is perfectly sensible. In the pink area they speak English, in the whatever it is area they speak Russian, and so on. But imagine that science worked like that, when you had areas where people believe that a comet killed the dinosaurs, another area where people believe that the mammals outclassed them, another area where people believe that a virus killed the dinosaurs. And yet that's what religion does. We accept atlases in which it's shaded in the map of the world. Here they believe so-and-so, there they believe so-and-so. In one area, wine symbolizes blood in the Holy Communion. In another area, wine becomes blood. In one area of the Indian subcontinent, there are hundreds of gods. In another area, Allah is the only God. And that's the consequence of this traditionally handed down faith, traditionally handed down conviction, which is not based upon evidence, but where not just religious people themselves, but the whole of society buys into the extraordinary idea that we can get our wisdom, we can get our knowledge about the world and about humanity by tradition, which is handed down. Of course it's a recipe for bloodshed. How could it be anything else? I want to end now in the tradition started by Michael Shermer yesterday of plugging one's own books. And by the way, while you're doing your borrowing from the library of Randy's and Shermer's books, you might borrow mine as well. Okay. The final words. My latest book is called The Ancestor's Tale, and it's a pilgrimage. It's a history of life written in the form of a backwards pilgrimage from the present to the past, with a sort of Chaucerian motif in which there are tales, like the Canterbury Tales. And I play the role of Chaucer's host. And you may remember that at the end of the Canterbury Tales, the pilgrims were led home again by the host, back to London from Canterbury. So these are the final words of the book. If, as returning host, I reflect on the whole pilgrimage of which I have been a part, my overwhelming reaction is one of amazement. Amazement not only at the extravaganza of detail that we have seen, amazement too at the very fact that there are any such details to be had at all on any planet. The universe could so easily have remained lifeless and simple, just physics and chemistry, just the scattered dust of the cosmic explosion that gave birth to time and space. The fact that it did not, the fact that life evolved out of nearly nothing, some 10 billion years after the universe evolved out of literally nothing, is a fact so staggering that I would be mad to attempt words to convey it properly. And even that is not the end of the matter. Not only did evolution happen, it eventually led to beings capable of comprehending the process, and even of comprehending the process by which they comprehend it. This pilgrimage has been a trip, not just in the literal sense, but in the countercultural sense I met when a young man in California in the 1960s. The most potent hallucinogen on sale in Haight or Ashbury or Telegraph Avenue would be tame by comparison. If it's amazement you want, the real world has it all. Not to stray outside the covers of this book, think of Venus's girdle, migrating jellyfish and tiny harpoons. Think of the platypus's radar and the electric fish, of the horsefly larva with the apparent foresight to preempt cracks in the mud. Think redwood, think peacock. Think starfish with its piped hydraulic power. Think cichlids of Lake Victoria, evolving how many orders of magnitude faster than Lingula, Limulus, or Latimeria? It is not pride in my book, but reverence for life itself that encourages me to say, if you want a justification for the second, open the first, anywhere at random. And reflect on the fact that although this book has been written from a human point of view, another book could have been written in parallel for any of 10 million starting pilgrims. Not only is life on this planet amazing and deeply satisfying to all whose senses have not become dulled by familiarity, the very fact that we have evolved the brain power to understand our evolutionary genesis redoubles the amazement and compounds the satisfaction. Pilgrimage implies piety and reverence. I have not had occasion here to mention my impatience with traditional piety and my disdain for reverence where the object is anything supernatural, but I make no secret of them. It is not because I wish to limit or circumscribe reverence, not because I want to reduce or downgrade the true reverence with which we are moved to celebrate the universe once we understand it properly. On the contrary, would be an understatement. My objection to supernatural beliefs is precisely that they miserably fail to do justice to the sublime grandeur of the real world. They represent a narrowing down from reality, an impoverishment of what the real world has to offer. I suspect that many who call themselves religious would find themselves agreeing with me. To them, I would only quote a favorite remark that I overheard in a different context at a scientific conference. A distinguished elder statesman of my subject was having a long argument with a colleague. As the altercation came to an end, he twinkled and said, "You know, we really do agree. It's just that you say it wrong." Thank you very much.